It's time to talk This Week in Bidenomics with Yahoo Finance's own Rick Newman. And Rick, you took a look at the impact of one of President Biden's tax proposals, and specifically that 15% minimum tax on book income for large companies. And I'm wondering which companies are getting impacted by this, and what are the implications that you're seeing so far?
Right. So this is the week Biden did formally unveil his corporate tax plan. We're going to get more plans in a few weeks, I think, on raising some individual income tax rates. But one of the changes from what Biden said he wanted to do when he was a candidate is this minimum corporate tax. So the original threshold for income was $100 million, and Biden has now raised that threshold to $2 billion. So you wouldn't be facing this corporate minimum tax unless you make at least $200 billion in profit or net income. So I was very curious. How many companies actually hit that threshold, and what's the difference between the old threshold and the new? Well, I used S&P Capital IQ data here, and I found of the S&P 500 companies, only 124 have income over $2 billion if you're going back on the last 12 months. And if you were to go much lower than that, down to the $100 million threshold, it would be more than 400 companies. So there are something like 280 companies that would have faced this minimum tax under the old plan and do not face the tax under the new plan. So I think this is actually a flaw in the plan. I mean, it's basically just setting an arbitrary threshold. Used to be 100 million, but now it's 2 billion. And if you make more than that, well, we're going to hit you with this alternative minimum tax. It's not clear Congress is going to pass it. But if Congress does pass it, I think that we're going to find companies starting to play a lot of clever games with the way they report income. So maybe to get under that $2 billion threshold.
Yeah, Rick, that's interesting there, the arbitrary threshold comment that you just had, because I guess that really points to the fact that maybe there is no, or what is the rationale for drawing that higher profit threshold? And it sounds like we don't really know what that rationale would be, or if there is one.
I don't think there's a solid economic rationale, but I think the political rationale is obvious. And it's sort of like how big of a company can you declare war on and get away with it? I think that's what the Biden administration is thinking here. And if you go down to cover mostly every company in the S&P 500, first of all, that's going to affect companies all over the country. Literally, it's probably going to hit companies in literally every state and every big city. But if you limit it to just the big companies, voters aren't really going to get too upset if you go after the big companies. By definition, if you're basing this on profit, these are the most profitable companies, so they are thriving by definition. There's not a lot of love for some of these companies. I mean, a lot of consumers have issues with Facebook and Google, for example. So maybe maybe the Biden administration thinks it's just politically easier if you're only going after the biggest, most profitable and most successful companies rather than what seems to be like every company.